Mr. Tyler Jaax. Welcome.
So what would happen if the world's coral reefs were gone? I think a lot of us may know a little bit about that from the news or social media or maybe a Netflix documentary you've seen. But why on earth would that really matter? And what would the impact be? I think for some of us, that ecosystem hidden beneath the water's surface is not in front of us every day. We don't see it with our eyes on a regular basis. So perhaps it falls to the background as being something that's less important than the environment in front of us every day. So how important really are these ecosystems beneath the water? So to start off, the ocean is vast, and there's some statistics I'll walk you through here. 0.1% of the ocean is coral reefs. That tiny, minuscule fragment of the ocean is coral reef. About 1% of the ocean includes mangroves, which is another ecosystem on the coastline that also includes coral. Even though that's such a small portion of the ocean, 1 in 4 marine animals rely on corals to live. So if corals are gone, we can say goodbye to 25% of marine life that we know about. Also, if we're thinking about climate change, corals and mangroves are an insane carbon sink. So compared to all the terrestrial forests worldwide, corals and mangroves can absorb 4 times the amount of carbon dioxide of all terrestrial forests on land. Obviously, in doing so, they're creating a ton of oxygen that we breathe every day. And the greatest supplier of oxygen on this planet is the ocean. Those habitats are clearly providing a huge amount of that air that we breathe. So maybe now you might be thinking, okay, maybe these ecosystems are important, maybe we should care about them, maybe we should do something about the fact that they're becoming extinct, they're getting wiped out. But you might also be wondering, what in the heck is a coral? So I'm going to walk you through a little crash course. It might be oversimplified to somebody who's knowledgeable on this topic. If you're a marine biologist, I apologize. But for those of you who aren't familiar with this concept, I want to give you a little bit of an inside look. So the first thing I want to mention is corals are animals. A lot of people think maybe it's a rock, maybe it's a plant, maybe it's an alien. They certainly look like aliens sometimes if you've seen pictures of them. But corals are animals. They're called a sessile invertebrate, which means they have no spine and they can't move around. Next thing that's very interesting, and this is something I'll focus on 90% of coral life during this presentation, which is the coral life that is photosynthetic. So some of you might know, well, you're in the sunlight right now, so maybe you're experiencing this. But photosynthetic means they get their energy from the sun. So 90% of coral life in the wild does so, and they do so in a very unique way. And this is where they do kind of seem a little bit like aliens to me. They have a symbiotic relationship with an algae that lives within their bodies. And that algae is called zooxanthellae. You didn't need to know that. I just felt like saying it. And that algae provides 90% of the energy for that coral to grow and develop. Some corals, categorized as stony corals, have a skeleton. Some don't. But there are some that have a skeleton, and those are a great majority of the corals and animals that they're talking about in those documentaries that are bleaching, per se. I'll get to that in just a second. In addition to the algae that's giving them energy to grow, corals have polyps. Sometimes they look like little flowers or like a Venus flytrap that captures food from the water. They can be small enough that you can barely see it with your naked eye, or they can be the size of a dinner plate or even larger. And you can feed coral. But for photosynthetic corals, it only really gives them 10% of the energy they need to grow and develop. So the most important thing for their energy is that algae they're depending on. Another interesting thing about coral, that algae that lives in their tissue is a brown or beige base color. But a lot of coral, if you've seen pictures or anything amazing about them, they have amazing colors, every color you can possibly imagine. And what they do, why they have that extra color, is they're regulating the sun's energy getting to that algae that is hosted within their body and using it as a sunscreen. So I can have an opaque color that's with the coral, but there's also one of my favorite facets of coral is the bioluminescent proteins. They glow in the dark. It's amazing. And if you have seen coral that's very deep in the ocean, well, one thing you got to know, the ocean's blue. It's blue for a reason. When you look into the ocean, the first spectrum of light that's filtered out is yellow, red, and green. As it goes deeper, the only light that's penetrating the water is blue UV ultraviolet spectrum. So the deeper you go in the ocean, it's all blue and purple down there. And what happens when you have a dark blue or ultraviolet light shining on a bright color? It pops. It's amazing. And those bioluminescent proteins really show off that color when they're deep in the water, those animals. A lot of them are about 30 meters or deeper when we're talking about some of the most beautiful corals. So you might be wondering, why is this guy standing up here talking about corals in front of me right now? Why do I care? Why am I so passionate and invested in this topic? And for me, I've had some B-roll that's been playing for this entire time right now, and these are my pets. These are my animals. I've been in the reef keeping hobby for about 12 years. And in the hobby, we would say we've been reefing for 12 years, but that has some different connotations, so we'll leave that one to the hobbyist circles. But that hobby has led to a passion, and I want to share that with other people. And I want to talk a little bit about, I think this hobby has some assumptions about it, some things that people assume, hey, it's bad, you're taking animals out of the environment, and it's hurting those ecosystems. What I want to share is why there's 7 million people in this hobby around the world that might be doing just the opposite. This is a big piece of that for me. Some facets of the hobby that I feel like are making strides in this space. Knowledge leads to advocacy. Why am I here today talking to you about this? I care. In this hobby, you cannot be successful by just going to the store, buying a coral, and putting it in a box of water. You need to research and learn and learn and learn and learn. And it never ends. There are new discoveries happening in the hobby and in the ocean world every day. I think in the last 16 months, there were 900 new marine species discovered. Always something new. And when you spend that time, you invest that time, we're all in the learning community here, we know what that means. You become passionate about it. You care about it. In caring about it, you also start to understand the science behind it. Why those ecosystems are dying, why the animals are getting wiped out, what is happening. And in understanding the science, I want to go back to and talk briefly about that algae that's living within the coral's tissue. It's a catch-22. The algae is providing all the energy, or most of it, for those corals. But it's also the reason why they're bleaching. When the corals receive too much sun, or the ocean temperatures are rising, or they get stressed, They self-regulate by saying, I'm getting too much food from my hosted friend here. And they start to expel that algae out of their body. And that base tan or brown color disappears. And their skin or tissue becomes transparent, and all you see beneath is bone-white skeleton. That's what coral bleaching is. There's a variety of factors for why that's happening. But when you understand the science, you start to know and care about the fact that it's happening at all. One of my favorite parts about the knowledge that I've gained from this is to share it with other people. And the person I enjoy sharing it with the most is my daughter, Nora. She's 6 years old. She is probably the only 6-year-old I know that knows the Latin names for the corals in my aquarium and can point to them and say, that's an acropora. I don't know any other 6-year-old that can do that, so I'm sure they're out there. Probably the other 7 million people in the world doing this have kids that know that too. But anyway, you create champions for reef survival, advocates for these ecosystems by giving them that knowledge and passing that on to them. Another facet of the hobby, and it comes in very similarly to my last point, is the power of sharing. Mentorship is a huge part of this hobby. I have had some amazing mentors. I will say, if you're going to have somebody getting into this hobby that you want to listen to, ask to see their aquarium first. We want empirical evidence that we can trust what they're saying is my word of advice. But I know someone who's been doing this hobby for 25 years, and he's had so much success that the corals that had been growing in his aquarium got so big, he's donated them to zoos, he's donated them to research facilities, and he's really making a difference in that space. But that mentorship is so fun. It's fun to be on both sides. It's a community. Here's a weird concept for you. There's something in the hobby called coral fragmentation. I'll preface this by saying corals can feel, they can respond to touch, they have no pain receptors. So just in case you're worried that we're chopping up animals that feel it, we're not. It's a very natural process that happens in the ocean. If a coral gets knocked off, it falls down and grows into a new colony right in that place. What we do in the hobby is do that unnaturally. We cut pieces. You can use a bandsaw, a knife, bone cutters, and you cut a piece of the animal, use super glue or epoxy, and put it on something called a frag plug. Usually 1 inch or ½ inch diameter ceramic disc. And you can see the example image here of a coral frag. Amazing coral called a Phovites, amazing color variant, it's extremely rare. But that coral has already begun to heal and grow over that ceramic disc. And you can sell that, share it with friends in the hobby, so on and so forth. I will tell you, there is nothing that catches the eye of law enforcement more than me parking with a friend in the back of a parking lot with our trunks open, a cooler open, and inspecting clear plastic baggies. If you want to learn more about those stories, come find me after this. But I have some fun anecdotes. So coral frags, very cool to share in the community. And another cool aspect of that is I have corals in my aquarium that are in 6 or 7 friends' aquariums. So if something happens to mine, I have a bank, I have a backup, and I can get that animal back. And it's a very cool concept. Another part of this, I mentioned my endeavors in parking lots. Supporting new hobbyists is a big part of this for me. This hobby is not cheap. It's expensive. If you buy directly from some of the companies that I'll mention later, it's not cheap. But if I'm having success and things are outgrowing my aquarium, I give them away for free. If it gets somebody into the hobby and into this, I'm willing to do that. For a fraction of the cost or free, I've done it countless times, and it's been really fun to do that. And it helps support people that want to get involved and maybe don't have the budget for it. The last piece of the hobby I want to share that for me is bringing a strong light to this situation of the reefs being destroyed and becoming extinct, are the organizations that are behind and supporting hobbyists, that are adjacent to other organizations that are restoring the world's reefs right now. So I want to talk a little bit about that next. These are two examples of some of the legacy, long-standing organizations that are hobby-funded. They're for hobbyists. Oceans, Reefs, and Aquariums, and Biota Aquariums, they're both down in Florida. They have massive farms of strains of coral, fish that they're captive breeding, invertebrates that they're captive breeding. They've made strides in research in the last 10 to 20 years to spawn coral in captivity, which is something that's just amazing that's happening. Without those hobby organizations and this hobby funding their research, a lot of that might not be happening at the pace that it is right now to find solutions to save these ecosystems. They align directly with my mantra in the hobby, which is don't take anything out of the ocean. There's a piece of coral from ORA that they have had for over 30 years. They took a small piece and they've grown it so much, it's all around the world. It's been distributed everywhere. It's all over the place. And it just came from taking a 1-inch fragment from the ocean. So you can get these animals without taking from the ocean. You can have an entire aquarium that is completely aquacultured and captive bred animals, which is typically where I lean. These are a couple of the organizations, one of which was on the program today to potentially donate to or to recognize. Very similar names. They are working at scale, doing some of the things that I mentioned. They are saving corals from reefs that are bleaching, and they're banking them in captivity. They're helping them become more resilient and creating strains of coral that can handle more change so that they can one day reintroduce those endemic species back to the habitats they came from safely. They're doing that with the technology, research, and things that have really been expedited and learned in the hobby. They're taking bigger coral frags, planting them back in the ocean, and watching them grow. If you go to their website, you can see some really cool progress on how that has worked. There have been complete reefs that have been wiped out. They've come back and planted things again, and all that marine life that relies on those animals starts to come back. And it's a beautiful thing. So lastly, I don't know, should you do it? This hobby is challenging, but it's really paving the way, I think, for a lot of awareness in what we need to be doing or should be thinking about with these ecosystems. If you could create advocates for current and future generations for this world beneath the surface, something that, for me, feels like one of the greatest natural allies against climate change, why wouldn't you? If all the world's reefs were wiped out tomorrow, would you want to be one of the few hobbyists around the world that has a bank of those creatures in your living room? I know I do. Thanks, everybody.